Hello, grade 11 students. This is the first of the many learning sessions for creative nonfiction. I'm Jasper Angeles and I will be your virtual teacher for this lesson. Before anything else, I would like to show you this picture. Where do you think is this place? Come on, comment your answers on the comment box. Do not hesitate to write your answers there. Again, where do you think is this place? Come on, guess it. Do you have any guess as to what this place is? All right, so you might be thinking, or you might have answered several places outside the country, but this place is definitely Manhattan, New York City. Even if you haven't been to Manhattan, I believe that you would be able to tell us about, or a lot about this place, right? Just based on the picture alone. Which things in the picture make up what Manhattan is? All right, so Manhattan is full of tall buildings, some of them being skyscrapers, right? But despite the large part of the city allotted to buildings, they still have this small forest park, this one at the bottom part of the picture. This is similar to some of the green parks you would barely notice within the always busy cities of Metro Manila. What is interesting about Manhattan is that it seems that all parts of this place is occupied. Here and there are buildings. So we can therefore consider that this city is a rather compact one. Now, if you are to write an article about those or about this uh, place, alright, if you want to write an article for those who wish to visit Manhattan, how would you write this article? I have here two passages that tell something about Manhattan. What I'd like you to do is to read them and decide which of these two passages would you rather read about this place. Let's see the first one. This passage comes from the AAA Tour Book New York. From the title of the piece where this came from, you would already know that this passage comes from a book intended for tourists. Let me read this for you. Be alert at all times. The traffic density of streets in Manhattan is probably the highest in the country. When driving in the other boroughs, a street index and a map are necessities. Note, drivers should keep car doors locked at all times. Let's see the other passage. A child who grows up 11 stories in the air has a peculiar relationship with outdoors. From the bedroom window, it was the sky that was my landscape, not the ground. The trees, saplings when I was a child, now 6 stories high, were seen from above, their trunks invisible under a great territory of leaves. It was as easy to touch a cloud as the earth below. This passage comes from 11 Stories High, Growing Up in the Stuyvesant Town by Corinne Dimas. How is this passage about Manhattan different from the one you have read? While thinking of differences, I'd like to bring you to another place. Are you familiar with this place? There is a dancing fountain in front of a tall Christmas tree. If your answer is Valenzuela People's Park, then you are certainly correct. Since you're already familiar with this place, I'd like to bring you somewhere similar to this park but altogether foreign to you. Grade 11, this is Washington Square. How would you describe this place? Come on, look at the picture and describe the place. Comment your answers on the comment box. Alright, you can say that this place is full of people, right? And that these people are really enjoying themselves. That arc that is in the picture is actually the iconic Washington Square arc. You may find this arc in many American action movies actually. Now, just like what we did for Manhattan, we will look at two passages about Washington Square. Are you ready? I'd like you to look at the differences in how Washington Square is depicted in the two passages. Alright, so let's read. Okay, so let us read this passage from the Best of New York by Galt and Milo. This is the geographic center of the village. Around the park's central water fountain, you'll see street musicians, ventriloquists, comedians, crack frisbee throwers, skateboarding youngsters, magicians, jump roping, unicyclists, and disco roller skaters. The Washington Square Arc 1982 is a Stanford White's copy of a wood arc made 3 years earlier to commemorate the centennial of George Washington's inauguration. Let us use the second, or let's see, the second passage written now by Pearl and Schwartz 2006. Already late, I begin walking very fast toward the park. The air is smoky with New York winter grit, and on a clogged Broadway, a mob of trucks shift squawking gears. But there, just ahead, crisscrossed by paths under high branches, is Washington Square. What are the differences between these two passages? Before we look at the differences, let's look at the similarities between these two passages about Manhattan and Washington Square. All right. So, how would you describe the way these two passages describe the places or the two places we saw a while ago? Are these real details about the two places? Come on, comment your answers. Is it a yes or a no from you? Are these real details about the two places? All right. Given what you saw in the pictures, you would agree that Manhattan, as a compact place, has really big chances of experiencing traffic because of its many establishments. Also, given the many visitors in the Washington Square, there is truth in saying that the park, aside from the central water fountain, attracts people from all walks of life, as stated by Galt and Milot. So, are these passages based on reality? The answer, I think, is a big fat yes. Aside from being factual, these two passages are focused on details. You will notice this in how both passages introduce specific details that make us really see Manhattan and Washington Square with our own eyes. Now, I think that the biggest similarity between these two passages is the straightforward way of telling information about the two places. Adjectives here are limited. The description of the places can be discerned from the individual parts of the places. Moreover, you will see that the passages were written using the objective point of view. This straightforward and objective nature is something absent in the counterpart passages for the same places. In these two passages, truth is still evident since both of them are based on real life experiences. The only difference between this set of passages with the previous set is the way the places were described. In the passage for Manhattan, it's obvious that such place was described using a point of view that compares the Manhattan of before and of the present. Instead of saying right away or in a straightforward manner that this place is a green park, the one speaking in the passage little by little told us what he or she sees in order to allow us to infer that there is indeed an allotted green park in the middle of a busy city. This way of presenting the place using one's experiences and the things he or she sees, hears, smells, tastes, and touches is also evident in the passage about the Washington Square. It is true that in this passage about Washington Square, you won't know which kinds of people visit, such as the place, as what was done by the previous passage. However, in this passage that you can see here about Washington Square, more than the people the narrator sees, he or she brings us in his or her very position looking at the various corners of the square. Given all of these things we talked about, we can all agree that these two passages that you can see are yes, factual, but facts told descriptively and with appeal to the senses through the writer's first-hand or subjective experience about such facts. Now, What do we call passages that are based on reality but were written in such a way that the elements of storytelling are employed? Come on, comment your answers. Do not be shy. Again, let me repeat the question. Given all the things that we have said, what do we call passages that are based on reality but were written in such a way that the elements of storytelling are still employed? What do you think? If your answer is creative nonfiction, then you are certainly correct. Before looking at the formal definition and subgenres of this topic, let's first define what we mean by creative and nonfiction. What's the meaning of the two words that comprise the term creative nonfiction? Remember, class, that the difference between creative writing and creative nonfiction is the very kind of story being told. A story is creative if the writer tweaks the story or invents events in order to satisfy the elements of a certain genre. What are these elements we're talking about? These elements, class, vary from one genre to the other, though there are similarities between and among the many genres. Prose, for example, has the elements such as plot, characterization, setting, characters, theme, and other elements. Poetry includes the number of lines and other elements such as a persona, addressee, and theme. Drama, if you still remember your creative writing class, uses both the elements of prose and poetry to bring a certain story to life. There are dialogues and gestures that lead to the characterization of actors. Sometimes poetic lines are also included for dramatic effect. Note that it's typical to see these elements of fiction and poetry on subgenres of such. For prose, we have short stories, novellas, and novels. For poetry, we have different kinds of poems like sonnet, elegy, ballad, and others. Drama class have also subgenres like tragedy, comedy, and a lot more. When we read these subgenres, we are placed into an imaginary adventure. We do not say that creative writing is just a mere invention of a story. Creative writers indeed invent, if not place the readers on an adventure. But remember that these stories and poems were inspired also by the things the writer saw in his own milieu. Though they turned reality into imaginary, these subgenres do not resemble any of the non-creative, non-fictional, or technical ways of writing. News articles, opinion columns, which are part of what we call journalism, in addition to business reports, research articles, and even the simple manuals of appliances, do not use the elements of creative writing to fulfill the purpose or their purposes. We do not use figures of speech or symbolisms or even paradoxes when writing a news article. Why is this the case? Obviously, a news article is a straightforward way of telling an event. It is short because the intention is for the readers to save time reading the article. You cannot write a lengthy article or else that would defeat the element of urgency of a news article. What about in business writing? In writing a business proposal, you cannot use the same kind of language because a businessman does not have the luxury of time to decode the meaning of each sentence. They need the straightforward facts in order for them to decide quickly on the matter. Now, what is common among these nonfiction writings is the fact that the writer must always take the objective position. News articles are obviously written in an objective position. The writer does not include his thoughts, emotions, or else the writer or the article will be judged biased towards something. Business proposals cannot be written also with an I or a we. The businessman always represents a business, so the name of the business must always be the one used to represent that or those words I and we. Using personal pronouns risk the business owner as subjective and can therefore be influenced by emotions or personalities that often lead to business failures. All in all, you can say that Nonfiction writing is objective and always logical. That is straightforward because that is the 21st century way of defining professionalism, right? Being straightforward. Professionals do their jobs objectively, and that is, or that means to say that you do the job with little to no emotion at all. Just work. To do all of these, or to do this professional, or to suggest a professional tone, they either use their objective language, which is for the most part observing the kind of pronouns they use and the voice of the sentence they use, typically in the passive voice. To give you some examples of nonfiction writing, let's look at these headlines. Did you see the writer using the pronoun I or we in writing the headlines? Did you feel or notice any brush of the writer's emotions or personality in the headlines? When you are a writer for a newspaper, you always put premium on objective narration of news. That is, writing only the truth and nothing but the truth. Imagine if you see a headline like, I think the government pandemic plan is falling apart. First, with the use of the subjective pronoun I, the headline becomes opinionated. And people class are not looking for opinions as headlines. Second, falling apart is kind of literary. And literary, just like what we mentioned a while ago, is connected to creative writing or fiction. In short, the use of such term invalidates the factual element of a headline. That subjective tone is also discouraged in research articles. Alright, looking at this abstract class, you would notice that there are no I's or we's here. This is because the conveyance of such emotions and feelings in the paper makes the readers think that the results of the study were not motivated by the very variables under study in this research, but by the researcher himself. To avoid such, okay, that idea that the researcher was the one who influenced the researcher either uses the objective case or pronoun or the passive voice to narrate what has transpired in the research. In a nutshell, class, we can say that research writing as a form of nonfiction writing, and just like journalism and other forms of nonfiction, is done with emphasis on objectivity and logic. This is manifested in the use of objective pronouns and the passive voice. But contrary to this current practice, to the practice that we do in the 21st century, 162 years ago, a renowned researcher wrote his research against standards we use today. Can you guess who is this researcher? Alright, let me give you a clue. He theorized that it is possible that men were the evolution of monkeys. Again, to give you a clue, this man that we're talking about popularized the belief that men could actually be the evolution of monkeys. Class, when there's a question, remember to not hesitate to answer. So, who is this researcher? Imagine this research of him was published 162 years ago. If your answer is Charles Darwin, then you are correct. What was the title of his research? The title is entitled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. It is from this research that paved the way for us to think that the kind of beings we are today were motivated by the kind of situations our species faced in days of yore. Basically saying that the genes of the ones who survive are the ones carried over to the next generation. Now, let's look at how Darwin described pigeons in his research. Remember that his research involves a lot of species, a lot of animals, and one of those was pigeons. Let's read. Believing that it is always best to study some special group, I have, after deliberation, taken up domestic pigeons. I have kept every breed which I could purchase or obtain, and have been mostly kindly favored with skins from several quarters of the world. I have associated with several eminent fanciers and have been permitted to join two of the London pigeon clubs. The diversity of the breeds is something astonishing. So Reading the following things from The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, what they think is the pronoun we labeled a while ago as something prohibited in a research paper. Again, what was that pronoun we labeled as something prohibited in a research paper? Is something that that is prohibited, but we can see in Charles Darwin's research paper. Write your answer on the comment box. Correct. It's the pronoun I. All right. So now, why can't we use these subjective pronouns such as I when Darwin used it before? Well, remember that language is a social fact. Language, or the language that we use for a certain context, is decided always upon by the society. If the society says this is how we do it, then this is how we will do it. The process of dismantling this and returning to this way of research writing would take a very long time. All right, so in Darwin's time, credibility was less tied to the voice of objectivity. Scientific theory and personal anecdote existed, believe it or not, side by side. The subjective, not compatible with recent argument. Again, we're talking about their time. Okay, in their time, this was the way they produced reliable facts based on personal and direct experience. In our specialized age class, many nonfiction writers feel pressured to separate the world we measure by line and rule, or the world of science, and the world we feel with our hearts and imagination, or the literary world. We do not anymore combine these worlds in our writing. To write in the nonfiction tradition, one needs to write using an anonymous tone, which suggests formality on the writer's end. Now, I included this part in the discussion, the part about Darwin and the traditional way, if not the old way of writing research papers, to tell you that there was once a time in the course of humanity that allowed the relationship of subjectivity and objectivity in nonfiction writings, which in this case was a form of research. Now, creative writing seems to be a new form or a new form for an old tradition of writing, or letting the objective and subjective work together to describe the real world. The aim class of creative nonfiction is to make readers experience the world using I as a guide. By the world, or the word world here, we mean to say the real world. In creative nonfiction, we do not invent or tweak the stories, for they are always real. Instead of inventing stories, we look at a true story and present it using the elements that can only be accessed in creative writing. Remember, or do you still remember the elements we mentioned from creative writing? All right, the figures of speech, plot, persona, characterization, theme, and many others. These elements are what we use in presenting the facts that we're talking about. A creative nonfiction writer does not develop the story. He or she finds the story and tells the readers the reality, but in a creative way. To see the difference, here again are the sets of passages we got about Manhattan. The things presented by AAA Tour Book are all true based on the experiences of the one who wrote it. But to remain objective, that suggests formality in technical writing, of course. The writer, in order to do that, the writer did not use the pronoun I. It presents Manhattan in the very same way that a doctor prescribes a medicine. Very straightforward. This is quite different from Demas's 11 Stories High. Here we can see Manhattan in the eyes of a speaker because of the subjective pronoun I. In addition, we see not only information as to which things one will see in Manhattan. This work allows us to see what the narrator sees genuinely, as if we were there seeing the very same trees down the buildings. Contrary to the AAA tour book, Dima's version makes Manhattan interesting and surprising. Creative nonfiction class arouses interest by using storytelling, voice, and evocative language to eliminate facts, making the readers connect experientially, as if they were there. Evocative language meaning capable of being remembered in the same way that famous lines like I love you 3000 or may the force be with you or may the odds be ever in your favor have remained memorable to you. Right now, you have to admit that when you saw the picture, Manhattan is not something you'd look after or you'd visit anytime soon, right? Why is that? It's because it's just like Makati with all the tall buildings, right? Nothing is really surprising or exceptional about it, except, of course, if a certain food or certain something can only be enjoyed there. Here's where CNF or creative nonfiction comes into the picture. The role of creative nonfiction writer is to look for something surprising from the normally unsurprising thing like Manhattan. So aside from the interesting element, that particular story must likewise be surprising. How do we make a conventionally and normally dull thing surprising? We do that by writing something objective, leading to the subjective. What we normally see is, of course, the objective. Now, by looking at the subjective, we might see some surprise, something that we do not expect. An irrelevant name, for example, can be made surprising by writing first about what we normally see. This is an example. Let's read this paragraph about the name Robin. My name is Robin. It's spelled with a Y and not an I, and has one N. It has 5 letters and spelled backwards, or if spelled backwards, it is neighbor. It begins with R, has 2 syllables, and is easy to say. It is a female as well as a male name. It is the name of a bird. It is a name my mother liked. The things mentioned by the writer here are the very things we can already see from the name Robin, right? This is what we mean by beginning with the objective. What is normally seen by people. Even the mother's preference is something objective because this is not yet the way the writer looks at his or her name. Now let's look at the surprise, which refers to the subjective, the personal thoughts of the writer about his or her name. My name is Robin and I'm like a bird. I have skinny legs and a round belly, little eyes, and I sing when happy. I'd rather live in a tree anyways and peck worms for food, live in a soft rush basket, and lay my blue eggs. I'd rather sing than talk and be able to shiver in tiny waves like a bird with its little ear beating fast. I am named for this bird. How did my mother know to do that? Alright, so what is surprising here is that we did not expect that Robin would literally think of him or herself as a bird. Personal thoughts are not always observable to us, class. I think that you would agree with me with that. And that what makes a form of creative nonfiction like this surprising. Those personal thoughts make creative nonfiction surprising. Now, did you know that even definitions can be written in a creative nonfiction fashion? Remember the two important elements of CNF, interesting and surprising. Interesting because of the use of storytelling, evocative language, and other elements one would see in creative writing. Surprising because the piece begins with what we see to what we can see from the writer's personal thoughts. Now, I'd like you to read 3 definitions of creative nonfiction, then identify which is the creative nonfiction way of defining creative nonfiction. Let's begin with this first one. In creative nonfiction, reality is mediated and narrativized. The particular subjectivities of authors are crucial and should be textually embodied rather than effaced. Language and form must have a surface and texture that remind readers the work is artificed. Even though some readers are considerably more adept and enculturated, the work is not reserved for a narrow specialist audience. Now, is this the CNF way of defining CNF? Write your answer in the comment box. Now, while writing your answers, let's see the next one. Creative nonfiction uses storytelling techniques, i.e., dialogue, narrative description, figurative language, and character development to tell true stories as the writer experienced them. Creative nonfiction shares the following attributes: topics based on actual people, places, and events, emphasis on personal voice, graceful and memorable language, strong sensory detail, use of memory facts and research to shape point of view, and emphasis on lively prose that appeals to a broad audience. Now, is this the CNF way of defining CNF? Yes or no? Now, how about this one? This is the last one, the third one. Creative nonfiction or is real, or at least most of it. In my portfolio, Celeste really drove the pickup at age of 8, and my mother believed the TR7 would lift if she drove on uneven pavement. But as with any literary genre, my view is limited. The details chosen and molded to bring out something more than just what happened. What girl may have sat where I sit now, once crushed by comments to her poem? Perhaps mother napped on his couch or on this couch, exhausted with her schoolwork and new child. There are so many stories to tell, but one must choose, then find a way to retell it to generate interest in readers. Perhaps I'm starting to get comfortable on this couch. Alright, which is the creative nonfiction way of defining creative nonfiction? Is it the second, the first, or the third passage? Alright, I think that everyone would agree that the third one used storytelling techniques, right? Storytelling techniques pertain to the interesting element and the thoughts of the writer, which refers to the surprising element in defining what creative nonfiction is. Technically, CNF is the literary and creative way of writing true stories. Surprisingly, for a writer, it is a tedious task to choose one story from the many stories and decide to retell it, not to inform, but to generate interest on the reader's end. Now, just like creative writing, creative nonfiction is an umbrella term housing different forms of writing. CNF covers everything from childhood memoir to literary journalism about the world at large. Each form of creative nonfiction features an engaging voice luring you to read more into the work. This is also what you will do in writing your very own creative nonfiction. You tell your readers things about you in such a way that they become much more interested in reading about you. Since this is about you and your story, you likewise discover a lot about yourself, things that you might not have thought about yourself. Now, to just review the things we have already mentioned, CNF shows the truth. It shows allegiance to veracity, another word for truth. Drawing on fact to write truthfully about the real world. One's memory class and one's way of depicting that memory in colorful means are necessary to put justice to creative nonfiction's definition. Now, again, thoughts or though the write-ups are real, you as a creative nonfiction writer makes you and your story interesting using storytelling devices we have already talked about a while ago. Now, in making the story interesting, all right, you're open to a variety of techniques. You have what we call the poetic license, or the freedom in form and language to write about reality vividly. By doing this, you surprise the readers by making something ordinary extraordinary. The intention class is always make the readers think why they never thought of that something they always see. Again, there are several forms of creative nonfiction, but due to the limitations in our time, we'll introduce only a few of them. One of the widely known examples of CNF is the memoir. The Diary of a Young Girl, 1942 to 1944 by Anne Frank, and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou are two of the many examples of memoirs. These memoirs comprise stories about a slice of life in contrast with the autobiography that tells the whole life story from the day of birth to the present. Since this is the story of one's life from the writer himself or herself, memoirs rely heavily on memory or recapturing what's important in the past. Faithful to the elements of surprise, of course, the writer puts emphasis on perceptions and feelings of the writer of that memoir. Alright, so if you write a memoir, you're basically bringing your readers into your own world so that they can meet the people in your life, live in the landscape you've been, and understand the historic and cultural context as you remember it. You're like a character in the film telling the viewers who is this and who is that in your life. Where is this and where is that, and why do you have to do this and that? You're this character in that film, except that the film was actually a compilation of real life events. Now let's look at this example from Beauty when the other dancer is the self by Alice Walker. I am 12. When relatives come to visit, I hide in my room. My cousin Brenda, just my age, whose father works in the post office and whose mother is a nurse, comes to find me. Hello, she says, and she asks, looking at my recent school picture which I did not want taken, and on which the glove, as I think of it, is clearly visible. Here it's obvious that Alice Walker is the narrator telling you a real life event when she was 12. She did not only tell the objective, what is normally seen, like her age and family. She likewise said something about her thoughts, like how she feels about an unwanted picture we assumed as unwanted, because or when she describes such as something she did not want to be taken. Now, so much for the memoirs. Let's have another subgenre of CNF. Here we have the personal essay. This writing focuses less on the past and more on the present, exploring some aspects of the here and now, which can also include connections to the past. Let's see an example. They should take off their rings, my husband stated matter of factly as we watched CNN broadcasting more trouble from the Middle East. For 2 years, he had fought in the Iran-Iraq war, but rarely shared his experiences with me, perhaps feeling that his American-born wife might have difficulty relating to the realities of warfare in one's homeland. Reading this passage from Warring Memories by Candy Tayebi, you will understand what we mean by writing about the present with some references from the past. The narrator here, in this personal essay, tells the readers of her husband's past to make sense of why her husband behaves that way. Again, making sense of the present based on the past. This is quite different from the memoir. When the main focus is on the past, the writer, or when the writer is saying this is what happened to me, we call the piece memoir. When we focus on the present, or when the focus is on the present, when as in the Warring Memories, the past enlightens that present, we call the piece a personal essay. Both of them, okay, memoirs and personal essays, are stories of the writer's life. But memoirs present things from the past, while personal essays narrate something at present while still acknowledging some memories from the past. Now, next is portrait, which is also called the profile or biographical sketch. Unlike memoirs and personal essays, which are about the writers themselves, Portraits can be about someone you know well or about someone you've just met or read about. And just like what we said a while ago, we make the story of that individual interesting and at the same time surprising. An example would be this passage from the Miss Dennis School of Writing by Alice Steinbach. Let's read this. But it was not on Miss Dennis's appearance or her unusual teaching method, which had a lot in common with an out of control terrier, that made her special. What set her apart was her deep commitment to liberating the individual writer in each student. What lies at the heart of good writing, she told us over and over again, is the writer's ability to find his own unique voice and then to use it to tell an interesting story. Here, the elements to make Miss Dennis's story were evident, like dialogues and language that would really remember or that we would really remember, like unique voice being at the heart of good writing, right? This passage also has a surprising element because the writer included some thoughts on Miss Dennis. Now, if there is a form of writing about oneself and about another person, there is also one devoted to place, and that is what we call essay of place. This essay captures a setting or a series of events by combining factual information, sensory or strong sensory detail, a storyline, and the writer's point of view. Of course, an example would be this passage we have read a while ago. Here, the writer describes the air, the surroundings, and even Washington Square itself using sensory details like smoky air, winter grit, and a mob of trucks. All of these make us see something dark about the air, engaging about winter, and a lot more things we see, smell, or touch without physically being there. You can also write a factual story you have seen from a certain place and focus more on the influence of such place to the story when you write the essay of place. Now, let us proceed with or to the more opinionated one, which is the opinion essay. This class is an essay where you present a point of view on an issue. Do not mistake this for an opinion column in a newspaper. This is still CNF because elements of creative writing are still used like dialogues and other storytelling devices to present the opinions of the writer based on facts. Let us have this example from Serve or Fail by Dave Eggers. Let me read this for you. About now, most recent college graduates, a mere week or two beyond their last finals, are giving themselves a nice respite. Maybe they're on a beach, maybe they're on a road trip, maybe they're in their rooms painting their toenails black with a Q-tip and shoe polish. Does it matter? What's important is that they have some time off. Do they observe the time off? Well, yes and no. Yes, because finals week is stressful and sleep deprived, and possibly involves trucker style stimulants. No, because a good deal of the 4 years of college is spent playing football. I went to a large state school, the University of Illinois, and during my time there, I became one of the best two of three football players in the land of Lincoln. I learned to pass deftly between my rigid players, to play the corners, strike the ball like a cobra would strike something a cobra would want to strike. See, it's like an opinion column class, but the writer or the story of the writer's life is still integrated in the presentation of opinions. So when you write an opinion essay, you're like writing your opinion on a certain issue, but then incorporating also the life events that you've had in supporting your opinions. Last on our list, class, is the literary journalism. This subgenre combines investigative reporting with personal voice, storytelling, and memorable language. Rather than just convey facts, the writer wants to recreate the experience of the world being investigated. Now, unlike normal reporting where the focus is on what happened, literary journalism puts premium on what these events mean without telling them directly to the readers. Again, if you're writing creative nonfiction, you don't necessarily tell the audience what they must see. What you're gonna do would be to tell them, okay, the things that you see in order for them to also see what you are seeing. It's kind of a tongue twister, right? Okay, but it's true. You don't necessarily say what they have to see. You just let them see what you are seeing. All right. So a good example of this is the article of Ellen Barry from the New York Times. This is entitled "How to Get Away with Murder in Small Town India." This is so much investigative journalism. Why? Because the writer really dug into the case of this Indian woman who was intentionally and publicly killed by her own husband so that this man, her husband, can marry someone else. This murder was then closed as an accident because the man's family has connections with the town chief. Looking at this introductory part of the article, you'll notice already the brush of creative nonfiction. The use of I was evident in addition to the vivid and sensory descriptions used. If you'll read the whole article, You'll even see the dialogues between the writer and the witnesses. Again, literary journalism is an amalgam of traditional way of reporting news and the creative way of presenting a story. I hope that the discussion on the definition and the subgenres of creative nonfiction made you understand what it means to write nonfiction using creative means without compromising its truth value. Before we end, let's have some review. I have here three questions and I will read each question to you. All you have to do is to write your answer on the comment box within 30 seconds. Are you ready? Okay, so let's begin with this question. Based on the discussion in class, what does it mean to write creatively? When we say we write creatively, which elements do we consider, class? Again, the question is, what does it mean to write creatively? Just tell us, okay, what elements do we consider when we write creatively or when we write under the standards of creative nonfiction? You have 30 seconds to answer. Write your answer on the comment box. Timer starts now. All right. So what were your answers? When we write creatively, we certainly use the elements of creative writing or of prose or of poetry to be exact. These elements are used to write fictional stories, which we classify as creative because of their inventive nature. Also, when we write creatively, we invent or change certain parts of the story so that it becomes interesting. I hope that we had the same answers. All right. So if you're not able or you were not able to answer a thing on the first question, okay, make up for this one. Let's have another question. What does it mean to write nonfiction? A while ago, we asked, what does it mean to write creatively? Now, I'd like to ask you, based on the discussion, what you still remember about writing nonfiction. I'm not asking for you to describe what's creative nonfiction, huh? I would like you to describe what it means to write nonfiction. Which forms of writing are usually connected with nonfiction? You have 30 seconds to answer. Write your answer in the comment box. Timer starts now. All right. So when we write nonfiction, okay, what do we write? Okay. So when we write nonfiction, we are writing objective texts like business related or academically inclined texts like research reports or research papers. The emphasis, of course, is on the objectivity of these texts, commonly suggested by the objective case of pronoun or the passive voice. So if you have answers that have something to do with any of the things we said, then you are correct. You have understood what it means to write in a nonfiction tradition. Now, how about this second to the last question? Okay, so what does it mean to write creative nonfiction? A while ago, we asked what it means to write creatively, what it means to write in the nonfiction tradition. Now you combine both. Okay, what are the things involved when we write in the tradition of the creative nonfiction? Okay, write your answer on the comment box. Timer starts now. Okay, so class, to answer this question, okay, so we have the following sample answers. Remember that creative nonfiction is a combination of creative rather, of creative and nonfiction writings. Okay, so this involves the use of creative means of writing to present a true story. It uses storytelling, voice, evocative language, and makes an ordinary true story extraordinary. Now let's have our last question. Okay, I hope that you'd be able to answer these last question. What are the different subgenres of CNF? Okay, again, write in the comment box or on the comment box rather, the different subgenres of CNF. You have 30 seconds to do this. Timer starts now. Write your answer in the comment box. All right. So if your answer is one of the many answers here, okay, let's see the many answers. Okay, the 6 subgenres we have discussed for this session. If you answered one of those, then you are correct. Okay, so class, I hope that this lesson has already made some sparks in your mind as to what you will write about creatively in the succeeding sessions. Of course, the main goal of this subject is to empower you in writing your own memoirs, personal essays, literary journalism, articles, and other forms of creative nonfiction. Okay, so but before that, of course, before we ask you to write those, there would be series of sessions that would guide you in the writing of texts, which are considered creative nonfiction. Once again, this is your virtual teacher, Jasper Angeles, bidding you a partial goodbye. See you next time.